Hi, I'm Cam, and this group of friends thought they were opening a suitcase full of cash, but it ended up being anyone's worst nightmare. On August 19th, 2020, a group of teens went randonauting on a West Seattle beach. They stumbled upon a black suitcase. Immediately, they smelled the most putrid odor. They opened the suitcase and saw that something was wrapped in a black garbage bag. They decided to call the police. What the teens found turned out to be the bodies of 35-year-old Jessica Lewis and 27-year-old Austin Wenner. Autopsies revealed that Jessica had been shot multiple times, and Austin had suffered a single gunshot to the torso. They had both been beaten and dismembered to fit in the suitcases. The couple, who had been together for 8 years, had been killed 2 months prior to their discovery. The killer, 62-year-old Michael Lee Doodley, their landlord. On June 9th, Michael let another woman move into Jessica and Austin's apartment. When she entered, there was heaps of clothing everywhere. Under a pile, she saw the figure of a person and a bloody hand sticking out. She made a joke out of fear and Michael laughed. Michael told authorities that the victims hadn't paid $1,500 for rent. He also has a restraining order from his own daughter because he sexually assaulted her.
A guy confessed to a murder he committed 33 years ago because he was being haunted by the victim's ghost.
Jose Ferreira claims he has not had a night of peace since the 16th of March 1982. That night he had been at a high school party hanging out with 13-year-old Kerry Ann Yopik. This party was actually held at Kerry Ann's best friend's house, and they had all been drinking. So Jose casually asked Kerry if he wanted to go down to the basement, and at first she said yes. However, whilst walking down the stairs, she turned around to Jose and said, "Actually, this is a bad idea." Well, Jose simply said, "No, you're going to the basement," and he pushed her. As she lay there unmoving, he assaulted her, and when he was done, he realized that that fall had actually snapped her neck, and that Kerry was no longer alive. In a complete panic, he picked up her body and buried it in a shallow grave under the porch of her best friend's house. Kerry was reported missing, and 17 months later, her best friend's parents would seek to renovate that porch. That's when a carpenter would find her body. But because of a lack of evidence, no one could determine what had happened that night, and it would be 3 decades later before anyone would ever come forward. After giving her family closure, Jose was sentenced to prison for 7 years. You see, they had so little evidence besides the confession that he almost got away with it. Want more 7 Sins crime? You gotta hit that plus button.
16-year-old Rochelle Waterman didn't like her life, so she told her 25-year-old boyfriend to murder her mother. On November 14, 2004, an Alaska trooper got a call of a burning car with possible human remains. When the trooper got to the scene, the car was still smoldering and had human remains in the back seat. They discovered that the car hadn't crashed but had deliberately been set on fire. That same night, a call came in. A local man named Doc Waterman reported that his wife Lori was missing. Her Chrysler minivan was also gone. The burning vehicle was a Chrysler minivan, and dental records confirmed that the victim was Lori Waterman. The weekend that Lori was killed, Doc had been on a business trip, and their 16-year-old daughter, Rochelle, had been in Anchorage for a volleyball tournament. Their son, Jeffrey, had been in college on the mainland. When Doc and Rochelle arrived home, they realized that Lori was gone. There was a bottle of wine that had been left out, but Lori wasn't a drinker. Detectives found the tip of a rubber glove and fibers from a synthetic rope in the bedroom and footprints on a windowsill, all evidence that someone had broken into the house. Doc was ruled out as a suspect, and then the focus moved to Rochelle. Rochelle was dating 25-year-old Brian Riddell. The two were questioned along with a mutual friend, Jason Arendt. Rochelle and Brian made up an alibi, but Jason finally cracked and admitted that Brian was the murderer and did it because Rochelle was being abused by Lori. Brian admitted to killing Lori, but said that both him and Jason were involved and that they did it because they believed they were saving Rochelle, that she had asked them to murder her mother. The two men broke into Lori's home, tied her up, forced her to drink wine to intoxicate her to make it look like she'd been in a car accident, and put her in the backseat of her van. They drove her to an isolated spot, and Brian tried to snap her neck, but that didn't work, so he strangled her. They drove to another remote area and set her car on fire. Brian was arrested in 2004 and admitted that Rochelle had planned the attack. Rochelle eventually confessed, admitting the abuse was a lie. Brian pled guilty and received 99 years. Jason also pled guilty and received 50 years. Rochelle, after being tried twice, was convicted of criminally negligent homicide and was sentenced to only 3 years. She has since been released and has moved out of Alaska.
On October 26th of this year, 22-year-old Abigail Saldana was shot and killed by a man who was stalking, threatening, and harassing her. Abigail was a dancer at a club called Rick's Cabaret in Fort Worth, Texas. In the weeks leading up to her murder, Abigail told management and her friends that she was being harassed by a man who called himself Stan and who was a regular customer at her job. She was scared for her safety. She made a couple of posts on her Instagram, with one of them stating that Stan was irritated with how much money he had given her. Then a week before her murder, she made another Instagram post where she found and showed that a GPS tracker had been placed on her car, likely by Stan. Here's a short clip of that video.
My car like this. This is why you have to be careful. I don't really know what to do moving forward with this, but this definitely looks like a tracker to me.
According to Abigail's mom, she did report this to the police. On October 26 at around 9 p.m., someone called the police to report witnessing a major car crash off of an exit ramp near Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, which is near Rick's Cabaret. When police arrived, they found Abigail dead inside of her car, having been shot multiple times in the torso. 3 shell casings and broken glass were found not far from her car. Authorities talked to the manager at Rick's Cabaret, who told them that Abigail had been stalked and harassed by a man named Stan, and showed them her Instagram posts. This led them to 54-year-old Stanley Zeliga, who was obsessed with Abigail. In the week leading up to her murder, Stanley made a bunch of posts on Instagram about her. Like in this one, saying that he envisioned a future with her, but at the same time, he was trying to blackmail her for her SW work. Upon searching license plate reader records, authorities found that Stanley's red 2015 Ford F-150 pickup truck had been by Abigail's home at least 5 times over a 12-day period. Footage from a traffic camera near her apartment showed Stanley's truck trailing her car and placed him in close proximity to hers at the time of the shooting. A day later, a SWAT team entered Stanley's home in Irving, Texas after he refused to come out, and found him on his balcony with several self-inflicted cuts. He was arrested and is facing a murder charge. Stanley is currently being held in the Tarrant County Jail on a $250,000 bond. Abigail was young and had her whole life ahead of her. She's leaving behind a 5-year-old son.
This is the story of what people have described as the worst death imaginable. If you're extremely claustrophobic, you may not want to listen to the story, so trigger warning. This was the entrance to the Nutty Putty Cave in Utah. Known for its extremely narrow passageways, it has a length of approximately 1,355 feet and is about 145 feet deep. On November 24th, 2009, the fate of the Nutty Putty Cave would collide with the fate of recently married, father of one, 26-year-old John Edward Jones. And his wife was pregnant with their second child. John was known as someone who had a genuine love for people, he had a bright sense of humor, and he loved his daughter. And John was actually studying to become a pediatric cardiologist. Sadly, this will not come to fruition. At 8 p.m. on November 24th, 2009, John and 9 of his friends would enter the Nutty Putty Cave. Everything, oh god, I can't stand looking at this. Oh, the idea of being, so I'm claustrophobic as fuck. Everything was going great for them for roughly an hour. They made it to the biggest room of the cave, yay! But John decided he wanted to up the challenge and go through a really narrow section that's known as the birth canal. Unfortunately for John, he went first. It turns out John may not have actually entered the birth canal, but instead an area called Ed's Push, a passageway that actually doesn't lead to anywhere. But John kept pushing forward inch by inch until he couldn't go forward anymore. And he actually ended up getting stuck in a narrow fissure that went down. So he was literally upside down in an area that was measured as just 10 inches by 18 inches, or generally the size of the opening of a washing machine. And he was about 6 foot, 200 pounds. So John was stuck. So he's basically trapped about 100 feet below the ground. His friends tried and tried and tried, but they couldn't get him out. He tried wiggling and wiggling and wiggling, but nothing. Anytime they actually got a little bit of movement to pull him out, once they let go, he slid back down. This is when a rescue team was called in, and when one of them got to him in the cave, he told one of the rescuers, "Thank you so much for coming, but I just really, really want to get out of here." All they were able to see is John's feet. They tried lubing up and oiling up the walls, nothing. They tried drilling through rock. They hooked him up to things to try to pull him out that way, nothing. By the way, this is the representation of what it looked like. At one point, they were successfully able to pull him back several feet, but then the rope slipped and he slid back down. After 29 hours of suffering and being stuck upside down, John died. They have now sealed off the only entrance to the cave and memorialized John.
Did you know that a murder happened at a Lululemon store in Bethesda, Maryland in 2011? The case is commonly referred to as the Lululemon Murder, but I think it's important to remember the victim. Most people don't even know her name. This is Jayna Murray. Jayna was 30 years old in 2011, and she was known as being an incredible adventurer. By the time she was 30, she had visited 6 of the 7 continents, and she had studied abroad in Spain. After her study abroad program, she moved back to the DC area where she met her boyfriend, Fraser. In early 2011, Fraser had actually purchased an engagement ring and was planning to soon propose to Jayna. Jayna was working at a Lululemon store in Bethesda, and she really enjoyed her job. She loved to dance and loved to be active, and she had become a general manager at the store. So on the night of March 11th, 2011, Jayna was working a closing shift at the Lululemon with her coworker named Brittany Norwood. The next morning, Rachel, the store manager, showed up to find that the doors were unlocked, and she noticed that the place had kind of been ransacked. This Lululemon was actually next door to an Apple store, and that morning there was a huge line outside the Apple store because it was the day they were releasing the iPad 2. So Rachel was able to get help from somebody that was in line at the Apple store because she didn't want to go into the store alone, not knowing what was waiting inside. So this man went inside with her, and what they found was a total disarray. In this photo, you can see just a glimpse of what the store looked like. Clothes and shoes were strewn all over, there were hangers on the floor, clothes racks were taken down, and everything was kind of just a mess. So Rachel went back to the front of the store to call 911, and the man from the Apple store line said that he would continue walking in to see what else was inside. He started seeing a lot of blood, and eventually he came up to Jayna, who was laying face down in a pile of blood. He was about to go back to the front of the store when he heard a very slight, soft moaning sound. So he kept going farther back into the store, and that's where he found Brittany Norwood. Brittany was 28 years old and was also an employee at the Lululemon store, and she had been working the closing shift with Jayna that night. So when the man found her, she had been tied up and she was covered in blood, but it turned out that she really only had one big gash on her forehead. Police came to the store, took both Brittany and Jayna to the hospital, where Jayna was unfortunately pronounced dead. Brittany, though, really only had that one main injury on her forehead, and she was able to tell police what had happened. That's where I'll pick